The morning sun had barely risen when Rachel's words began to echo across the silent lawn of the country club. Yesterday, my brother called me the family embarrassment. Today, he will learn who has been paying for his life. It sounded like defiance, but it was something deeper and awakening. For years, Rachel had been the quiet shadow of a gilded family, enduring their laughter, their whispers, their pity. Yet beneath their scorn, she held the keys to everything they worshipped. And now, as the clock moved toward 9:30, the woman they dismissed was about to pull the curtain from the truth-won revelation that would turn their empire of pride into a mirror of regret. Yesterday, my brother called me the family embarrassment in front of 200 people. Tomorrow morning at 9:30, I am going to show him exactly who has been paying for his life. That is the only sentence I kept rehearsing in my head as I pulled into the Morgan family reunion. The July sun over Charleston had the kind of brightness that makes money look louder. The private lawn behind the Harbor Point Country Club had been turned into a display of legacy. White event tents, live jazz under soft string lights, waitstaff in pressed black vests carrying champagne on silver trays, crystal glasses catching the light, diamond bracelets catching the light, laughter catching the light. Everything shimmered. My car did not. I drove my 2013 Toyota Camry onto the circular drive and eased it between a black Porsche 911 Turbo S and a white Range Rover with custom trim. The paint on my rear bumper was still scarred from where a grocery cart hit it in the school parking lot back in March. The Porsche's paint looked like it had been polished with the tears of a marketing team. The valet looked at my car for 1 second longer than he looked at the others. He tried to hide that second. He failed. I handed him the keys anyway. I stepped out in a simple navy dress I had owned for 6 years. I smoothed the fabric and lifted my chin. Across the lawn, my brother was already holding court. Evan Morgan, 41 years old, tan, tailored, and absolutely certain that the sun was a prop that belonged to him. He was surrounded by cousins, in-laws, and admirers. His watch alone probably cost more than my entire car. He was in the middle of a story. One hand lifted just high enough to be photographed well if someone happened to be filming. He saw me. And because Evan is Evan, he did not just lower his voice and walk over like a decent person. He raised it. "Well, look who finally made it," he said, loud enough that the nearest table turned. "Rachel, the Camry survived the trip across town." Everybody, round of applause for the Camry. There was polite laughter, then real laughter, then too much laughter. I smiled. That is what I do in this family. I smile so that other people do not see me bleed. Evan widened his eyes in mock concern. "Do you need me to spot you gas money, Rach? Or are you still doing that little teacher hobby of yours?" More laughter. I heard Vanessa's voice float in from somewhere behind him. Vanessa Pierce was our cousin. 35, permanently sun-kissed, always perfectly photographed, and currently making a career online telling other people how to step into luxury. She did not look at me when she spoke. She looked at Evan. "Public school English teacher is kind of adorable," she said. "It feels like charity work. It is good for optics." Optics. My job. My life's work. Reduced to optics. Someone else slipped in. Because in my family, the only thing sharper than money is timing. Uncle Gregory, in his linen blazer and inherited arrogance, leaned back in his chair and said, "Your grandfather did not build Morgan Steel so his granddaughter could clip grocery coupons." A small circle had already formed around me. It is fascinating, in a clinical way, how fast humiliation attracts an audience. I opened my mouth. I intended to say something calm, something reasonable, something like, "My students matter, my work matters," but I did not have to answer, because power travels on its own in this family. The air shifted first, then they parted for her. Eleanor Morgan, matriarch, 86 years old, hair set in silver, walking with a dark walnut cane that had been carved for her the year my grandfather's company passed 9 figures in annual revenue. She moved slowly, but when Eleanor entered a space, the space rearranged itself to suit her. "Rachel," she said, voice warm enough to sound like love, cold enough to feel like law. "Sweetheart, you are almost 40. I turned toward her. "Hi, Grandma." She looked me up and down. She did not touch me. "The way you live reflects on the Morgan name," she said. I felt 30 pairs of eyes lean in. "I am fine with how I live," I said. Eleanor smiled, but it was the kind of smile that closes a door. Fine, she said gently. Is for people with no options. There it was. The blade. Silent, clean, precise. Something in my chest tightened. Evan laughed softly. We keep telling her, he said to the watching cousins, not to me. She has resources and still insists on playing poor. It is like performance art. I'm not playing anything, I said. Rachel, Vanessa said, tilting her head like she was examining a makeup sample. People are asking. You get quarterly distributions like the rest of us. Where does it all go? Several others joined in at once. Questions layered on questions. Are you mismanaging the money? Are you letting it sit somewhere? Do you even understand how to invest? I heard very clearly the phrase, irresponsible access to family funds. That one tasted like a verdict. I felt heat gather in my throat. My finances are private, I said. Evan laughed at that. Not loud, just delighted. Not when it is family money, he said. For a moment I could not breathe, not because of the money, because of the word it, not her income, not her work, not her decisions. It, an object, a problem, a leak. Me, spoken about like a liability line item. I stepped back, just half a step, just enough that the circle loosened and I could slip out between two chairs. No one tried to stop me. Of course they did not. They had more important conversations to continue. Evan was talking about a real estate partnership in Florida. Vanessa was explaining brand architecture. Eleanor had already turned her attention to a man from a bank. I crossed the lawn toward the quieter edge of the club grounds, where the grass met a line of magnolia trees. The air smelled like summer and salt water. Charleston always smells faintly like old heat and memory. I pulled my phone from my bag and stared at the blank screen so it would look like I had a reason to stand alone. My hands were shaking. Here is the truth I would never give them in that moment. It was not the car jokes. I have heard car jokes for years. It was not being called adorable for teaching in a public school. Like I was doing a community service shift and not a career. It was how easy it was for them to talk about me as if I were a problem to be fixed, not their sister. It is a strange thing, to be surrounded by blood and still feel like an outsider who wandered in through the service entrance. I opened my wallet and slid out a photograph I keep tucked behind my driver's license. The corners are worn soft from being touched too often. The colors are a little faded. It is me at 21, hair pulled back under a hard hat that was too big for me, face streaked with steel dust, standing next to my grandfather, Walter Morgan, on the floor of one of his plants. He is laughing in the photo. I am not. I am looking up at him like he has hung the moon. He used to say, "What you do with money tells me who you are. What you do without money tells me who you will be when no one is watching." I swallowed. I slid the photo back into my wallet before my hands could betray me. I needed to be steady. I needed to be calm. I needed not to let my voice break where anyone could hear it. Because in this family, weakness is retold as proof. By the time the servers announced lunch, the lawn had shifted from cocktails to ceremony. The long center tent had been set for the family business address, which is what the Morgans call it when someone wants to talk like a corporate executive into a microphone instead of talking like a relative over a plate of food. There were round tables under white fabric and cold air from portable units. There were flower arrangements so large they blocked sightlines. There were place cards with last names printed in metallic ink. I took my assigned seat. To my left was a cousin who made sure I knew she had just come back from Italy. To my right was a second cousin's husband, who did not remember my name, but remembered the make and year of my car. At the front of the tent, under uplighting that turned the canvas ceiling gold, stood Richard Hale. Richard is not technically a Morgan. He married into us 22 years ago. But Richard speaks like a chairman, so people let him pretend that his surname carries iron in it. He tapped the microphone twice. The low hum of side conversation began to fade. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said, with the smile of a man who likes being listened to. "It is an honor to stand here for another Morgan family reunion." People clapped. Some clapped because they meant it. Some clapped because you clap when a man with a microphone pauses. "As you all know," Richard continued, The Morgan name carries weight. It carries expectation. It carries visibility in this community and beyond this community. That word again. Visibility. He folded his hands, the posture of a surgeon explaining a difficult truth. In recent years, we have taken great care to ensure that our family presents itself in a way that reflects the strength and prosperity that Walter built. We have funded ventures that expand our footprint. We have supported image-forward projects. We have continued to demonstrate that being a Morgan still means something. Heads around me nodded. I felt my stomach go cold. Richard's smile shifted almost imperceptibly. However, he said, there is a concern we have to address. We have, within this family, a member who is not aligning with the standard expected of a Morgan heir, someone whose lifestyle choices do not reflect the level of access and opportunity that has been provided, someone who is, frankly, living below the image we project. The air pressure in the tent changed. People leaned forward. Utensils stopped moving. He did not say a name yet, and he did not have to. I felt the turn of heads toward me, even before he spoke it aloud. This is not a punishment, Richard said smoothly. This is accountability. The Morgan Trust is a shared legacy. It is our responsibility to make sure that access is used responsibly. And if it is not, we must be willing to reevaluate that access. He let that word hang. Access. My heart was steady now, too steady. Richard looked directly at me. Rachel Morgan, he said, in the same tone one might use to call a case number in a courtroom. We are going to need to review how you have managed your distributions. We are going to need reassurance that you are exercising appropriate judgment. And if you cannot provide that reassurance, we will have to consider whether your level of access remains appropriate going forward. There was a brief silence. Then a low wave of whispers rolled through the tent like heat. At our table, my cousin stopped pretending to cut her steak. On my right, the second cousin's husband let out a very soft, fascinated breath. I did not move. I kept my shoulders square. I kept my expression composed. I kept my eyes on Richard, but under the white tablecloth where no one could see, I had my hands clasped so tightly together that my knuckles had gone white. 200 people had just watched me be named the problem. And tomorrow morning, at 9:30, they were all going to learn what a mistake that was. The air beneath the main tent felt heavier after lunch, as if the humidity had mixed with tension and settled into every breath. The chatter of 60 relatives folded and unfolded like restless fabric. Silver cutlery clicked. A violinist in the corner tried to fill the silence between conversations, but the melody kept breaking under the weight of anticipation. At the center table, Evan stood, his voice carried with the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no. Nobody here is attacking Rachel, he said, raising both hands like a mediator. We are just worried about what her situation says about the Morgan brand. The Morgan brand. He said it as if it were a Fortune 500 company, not a bloodline. Around him, heads nodded, relieved to have a phrase that sounded respectable enough to disguise cruelty. I sat still. My name had already been turned into a cautionary tale, and my silence was being written into their story as guilt. Richard Hale rose next. His linen suit looked as though it had never met a wrinkle or a conscience. He adjusted the microphone. We will be conducting an internal audit of Rachel Morgan's distributions for the last 7 years. The sound spread through the tent. A collective inhale, then a hive of whispers. Forks froze above plates. Eyes found me again, some curious, some hungry. Vanessa tilted her head and spoke just loud enough. If she has been sitting on cash or making low-class choices, that affects all of us. I felt my pulse against my ribs, steady, deliberate, like footsteps on a long hallway. I had spent years preparing for control. I had not prepared for the ache of being spoken about as if I were a rumor. I looked at them. 60 faces, all carved from the same gene pool, all waiting for a spectacle. You are talking about me, I said, and my voice cracked once before it steadied, as if I am not standing here. The tent fell into a startled silence. The violin stopped. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. You are talking about me, I continued, like I am some charity case you are tired of funding. I am the one who shows up when you all disappear. I am the one who cleans up when your foundations collapse, and I'm done letting you pretend you are worried about me while you humiliate me. My voice was not flawless. It trembled on the edges. But truth does not need polish. It only needs to be heard. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then I saw it. The quick flicker in Evan's smile. Surprise, then irritation, then the kind of mock pity men use when they feel threatened. "Rachel," he said, almost laughing. "We are family." "Nobody wants a scene." I stood. The chair legs scraped the floor. A sharp human sound that sliced through their pretense. "You want an audit?" I said quietly. "Fine." I took one step toward the microphone, the soft click of my heels echoing against the tension. "You will get your audit." A murmur rippled. Someone dropped a spoon. Someone else whispered my name. "Tomorrow," I said. 9:30 a.m., the conference room upstairs. Every adult beneficiary shows up. Bring your spouses. Bring your lawyers. Bring anyone who thinks they are entitled to talk about me. I watched the first waves of confusion shift to disbelief. Evan laughed, but it was hollow. "You are really going to let us go through your books?" I met his eyes. "Not just mine," I said. "Yours." It was as if a glass pane had shattered between us. The laughter died. Words scattered. Every face turned toward me, then toward him, then back again. The hum of whispers rose into chaos. "What does she mean?" someone hissed. "Is that legal? Who does she think she is?" Evan's expression twisted, half incredulous, half uneasy. "You cannot be serious," he said. "You do not even have the authority." I cut him off. "Tomorrow morning, we will see exactly who has authority." The silence that followed was not quiet. It was electric, the kind of silence that hums with fear. Across the tent, I caught sight of my grandmother. Eleanor's hand tightened around her cane, her knuckles pale against the dark wood. For the first time in my life, I saw something uncertain flicker behind her composure. A question, maybe even a doubt. That was the moment I knew the balance had shifted. Just a fraction, but enough to open a fault line beneath the stage they stood on. I turned away before anyone could see the tremor in my hands. I walked past the tables, past the chandeliers strung like captured constellations, past the scent of flowers chosen for their price rather than their fragrance. Each step felt heavier and freer at the same time. Behind me, the noise swelled again, a chorus of confusion, indignation, and the first faint taste of fear. They were trying to fit this version of me into the frame they had built, and it did not fit. The teacher who drove a scratched Camry was not supposed to sound like she had a plan. Outside the tent, the sky had turned a shade of deep gold. The late-day light made the manicured lawns look almost honest. I stood at the edge of the path, drawing a slow breath. The air smelled of salt and magnolia, the same as it had when I was a child, sitting on my grandfather's shoulders, watching the ships move across the harbor. He used to say that pride is a poor captain. It sinks more families than storms ever could. For a moment, the memory pressed too close. The weight of the photograph in my wallet, the echo of his voice, the years I had spent in silence. All of it pressed against my ribs until I thought I might break. I did not cry. I had cried enough in rooms that did not deserve it. Instead, I looked back at the tent. Through the open flaps, I could still see the blur of movement, the shimmer of dresses, the restless glint of cutlery. I could hear Evan's voice rising again, trying to reclaim the center. Let him, I thought. Let him enjoy the last night of not knowing, because by tomorrow morning at 9:30, every person in that tent would learn exactly what I had been building while they laughed. I turned away and began to walk toward the parking lot. The evening air was cooler now. My steps were steady. "They think I am cornered," I whispered, half to the night, half to myself. "They have no idea I have been building this moment for 7 years." And with that, I kept walking, toward tomorrow, and the reckoning waiting behind a closed conference room door. The conference room at Harbor Point was designed to host corporate negotiations, not family reckonings. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the golf course in quiet perfection. White blinds stood half-drawn against the Charleston sun. A long dark wood table ran the length of the room, polished so smoothly it could have served as a mirror. leather chairs, soft carpeting, carafes of water and crystal glasses at every seating position. It looked dignified. The people inside it did not. By 9:20 a.m., every chair was taken. A few cousins, and spouses of cousins, and adult children of cousins had been forced to stand along the back wall. The low murmur of conversation was not social. It was hungry. It carried questions that sounded like whispered accusations. Is she serious? Can she actually do this? What if this affects my side of the distributions? On the far end of the table sat my grandmother, Eleanor Morgan. Her cane rested across her lap like a ceremonial staff. Her jaw was set. Her gaze was fixed on the head of the table, as if the right expression could hold this entire gathering together. On her right sat Evan. My brother had chosen his seat at the head of the table, the place a chief executive would sit. He leaned back with his arms loosely crossed, as if he owned calm. His shirt was open at the collar. His watch caught the light. His expression wore the smooth confidence of a man who plans to win the argument before it begins. On his left sat Richard Hale, hands folded, face arranged in neutral professionalism. Every inch of him said control across. From them were Vanessa and two others who made their livings, selling an image of power that had been handed to them long before they learned how to spell the word. At 9:28, the door opened. I walked in, and for the first time in 24 hours, I did not feel out of place, not because I matched them. I did not. I was still in a plain blouse, a dark blazer, and simple flats. My hair was pulled back. My face was bare, no jewelry except the thin silver ring I always wore on my right hand. It was not that I had finally learned how to belong in their world. It was that they were, without realizing it, standing in mine. Because this was not a cocktail tent. This was a meeting. This was documentation. This was record. This was structure. Behind me, a man entered and closed the door. He carried a slim leather folio and moved like someone who understood the weight of a room and did not feel the need to apologize for it. He was not family. He did not try to look like family. He took his place at my side, set the folio down with deliberate care, and looked around the table with the calm of a surgeon about to begin. A small murmur moved along the wall. Who is that? Is that her lawyer? Evan lifted his chin. Rachel, he said, smiling with a politeness that could cut skin. You brought representation. That is dramatic. I did not sit yet. I rested my hand lightly on the back of the empty chair beside me. This is Daniel Ruiz, I said. Daniel is counsel to the Morgan Family Trust. The temperature of the room changed by a few degrees. Evan frowned, just slightly. Richard's jaw tightened. My grandmother's fingers closed more firmly over her cane. Daniel greeted the room with one calm nod. Thank you for being here, he said. His voice was even and precise, shaped like a courtroom statement that had been sharpened many times in practice. We are meeting at the request of several Morgan family members who expressed concerns about Rachel Morgan's financial judgment and use of her distributions. The phrasing was intentional. It hung in the air like a mirror, and several people in the room were suddenly uncomfortable with the reflection. Evan leaned forward, palms open, gracious in the way a wolf can look gracious right before it bites. Exactly, he said. Nobody here wants a fight. We just want clarity. We need to know whether Rachel is capable, if she is handling the access she has been given responsibly. We are here to help her. That is all. There it was again. Help. As if this were an intervention. As if I were an illness. I took my seat. My heart was beating, not fast but deep. Every beat sounded steady in my throat. Daniel did not sit. Instead, he opened the folio and withdrew a single sheet of paper. He did not shuffle. He did not stall. He did not clear his throat, because he did not need to make space for himself. He already had it. Let us begin, he said. We will start with Evan Morgan. The room stilled. That was not what they had expected. For a brief and exquisite moment, I watched my brother's face falter. It was subtle, but I know Evan. I have known him since we shared a hallway in a childhood. I know what his mouth looks like when he believes he is adored. I know what it looks like when he is performing confidence. I know what it looks like when, for just a second, he loses balance. He lost balance. Excuse me? Evan said. Daniel did not apologize. Over the past 7 years, he said, voice controlled, clear, surgical. Evan Morgan's lifestyle, real estate acquisitions, vehicles, and travel billed as strategy or development retreats totaled just over $25 million in trust-funded spending. The room shook. Not physically. Emotionally. It was the kind of silence that sucks the air out of your lungs. I heard small sounds instead, a quiet intake of breath, a whispered what, a glass being set down too quickly against wood. Vanessa's perfectly glossed mouth opened without words. Someone against the back wall muttered, too stunned to lower their voice. 25 million. Evan gave a short, incredulous laugh. That is a distortion, he said. That is including property assets. That is including vehicles. That is including investments. Those are strategic placements, not spending. You are making it sound like I am reckless. Daniel did not turn his head. He continued to look directly at Evan, and in that stillness there was an authority I had never seen anyone use against my brother. It includes all approved distributions, Daniel said. Homes, cars, boats, equity lines, renovations, travel, and proposals filed as business development retreats. Cabo, for example. A flush climbed the side of Evan's throat. That, he said coolly, was networking. It was filed, Daniel said without changing his tone, as essential to long-term brand elevation. The words dropped into the center of the table like stones into deep water. By then, no one was pretending this was a kind conversation. Evan leaned back in his chair and forced a smile he could not quite hold. So what? He said. So what, Daniel? That is how this family works. We have access. We use it. We submit. It is approved. That is the system. You cannot sit here and act as if I am doing something unusual. You cannot pin this on me. Daniel did not blink. Every one of those approvals, he said softly, required a single signature. Evan's smile sharpened. Mine, he said. Daniel looked at him for one long second. Then he turned his hand, palm open, toward me. No, he said. Hers. For 5 full seconds, the room did not move. It was not shock like in movies, big and loud. It was worse. It was stillness. It was disbelief trying to rewrite itself into denial and failing. I felt the shift hit like a pressure wave. Evan let out a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a scoff. That is not funny, he said. Across the table, Vanessa whispered, What does that mean? Her voice was thin, almost childlike. My grandmother's cane slipped against her knee. She caught it, but her hand shook. Richard finally spoke. I think, he began carefully, there has been some confusion around terminology. We understand there is a trustee team. We understand funds are— No, Daniel said. There is no team. There is one trustee. He let the word land. Trustee. He did not dress it in decoration. He did not cloud it with jargon. He did not soften it with a smile. The Morgan Family Trust, Daniel continued, was structured by Walter Morgan with a single point of authority. He did this intentionally. Under that structure, the sole trustee, with legal authority to approve or deny distributions, pause benefits, or redirect funds, has been Rachel Morgan since the trust was established. No one breathed. Evan stared at me across the table, and for the first time in years, his eyes did not look down at me. They looked up. That is impossible, he said. She is a teacher. Yes, Daniel said. She is. The room began to fracture. Questions broke out and overlapped until they were no longer sentences, only noise. She has been signing off on everything? She could have cut us off this entire time? Wait, what does that mean for— What gives her the right— She was driving that car. How long has she had that authority? Since the trust was established, Daniel said. 7 years. My throat felt tight. Not with fear, with release. For 7 years I had been a quiet steward and a silent target. For 7 years I had listened to speeches about image from people who could not balance a month of their own spending. For 7 years I had approved purchases I knew were hollow and redirected funds where I could without blowing apart the illusion they were so desperate to live inside. Now the room knew. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam my hand on the table. I did not deliver a speech like a conqueror. I spoke the way you speak at the bedside of someone you refuse to give up on. Evan, I said. He did not answer. Evan, I said again, quieter this time, but more certain. His eyes locked on mine. You called me pathetic yesterday, I said. You told people I was embarrassing the Morgan name. You offered me gas money in front of our cousins. You said I was living small on purpose, just to make you look bad. No one in the room moved. My voice shook, not because I was unsure, but because I was tired of carrying the weight of my caution. While you laughed, I said, I was the one approving your houses. I was the one approving your cars. I was the one approving your networking retreat in Cabo that you filed as brand elevation. I was the one keeping you whole. Color drained from his face. His jaw clenched. His fingers flexed once and gripped the arm of his chair like he needed to feel something solid. I drew a breath. This is how it works now, I said, and let the words fill the room. Calm. Final. No more six-figure toys so someone can feel important for 48 hours. No more calling impulse spending strategy. No more burning money so that loneliness looks shiny. A cousin at the far end swallowed hard. Vanessa whispered, This is revenge. I turned to her. If this were revenge, I said softly, I would cut you off and walk away. This is not revenge. This is the point your grandfather knew would come. I reached into my bag. The room followed every motion of my hand as if it were a weapon. What I placed on the center of the table was not dramatic. It was a small, worn envelope. The paper had softened with age. The edges had begun to fray. There were faint oil marks at the corners where my fingers had touched it too many times. My grandmother made a small sound in her throat. I rested my fingertips on the envelope. Walter wrote this, I said. He gave it to me. He told me not to open it, and not to read it to any of you, until the day this family questioned whether I was responsible enough to have access. My eyes lifted, and met each face around the table. Evan, my grandmother, Richard, Vanessa, the cousins pressed against the wall. We have reached that day. No one spoke. No one breathed. The world outside the windows, the pristine green of the golf course, the slow movement of sprinklers at the edge of the fairway, felt impossibly distant. In here the air was different, denser, charged. After I read this, I said quietly, we are going to make changes. I slid the envelope toward the center of the table. Not because I want you to suffer, I said. Because I cannot keep watching you drown in things and call it happiness. And with that, with every eye on me and every thread of the family pulled taut, I broke the seal. The envelope felt softer than it looked. Time had thinned the paper, worn down its sharpness, rounded its corners. The edges had gone slightly dark, where my fingers had touched it too many times over too many nights. It did not look like power. It looked like something you keep because throwing it away would feel like throwing away a voice. I slid my thumb under the seal and opened it. No one in the room moved. The conference room, just minutes ago humming with layered whispers and pride and accusation, had gone so quiet that I could hear the soft mechanical hum of the air conditioning behind the walls. I could hear the faint tap of a cousin's heel against the carpet. I could hear my own breathing. I unfolded the letter. It was not long. My grandfather never needed many words. I read aloud. If you are reading this, I began, then it means the day has come. Across the table, my grandmother Eleanor lifted her chin a fraction. Her knuckles had gone white around her cane. The lines around her mouth were tight. She was listening, but she was also bracing. It means, I continued, that the family has finally started asking the wrong question. I looked up once. Every face was turned toward me. They are asking, I read, how much money does Rachel deserve to touch? How much should she have access to? How much has she used? How much has she kept? I swallowed. I am not worried about how much money Rachel touches, I read. I am worried about what the money is doing to the rest of you." The first fracture moved across the table like a silent crack of ice. Evan's jaw tightened. His gaze dropped for the first time. I went on. "You think I built the Morgan fortune so you could feel important?" I read. "You think I built it so you could impress strangers who will not remember your name in 10 years? You think I built it so you could buy noise?" Noise. The word felt heavier than anger. He was not scolding them for spending. He was grieving the emptiness inside the spending. "I did not build this so you could live louder," I read. "I built this so you could live better. Those are not the same thing." I let the room hold that. My grandfather's handwriting was steady. The strokes were sure, like steel beams. I remembered those hands. I remembered the way they could hold a briefing, a contract, and a crying child with the same certainty. "Rachel," I read, "I chose you." I felt my throat tighten. My eyes burned. "You are the only one in this family," I read slowly, "who never needed the money to feel like somebody." The air left the room in a single quiet exhale. Vanessa made a small sound, almost like a gasp she tried to swallow before it escaped her. "You never asked me for a boat to feel valuable," I read. "You never asked me for a house to feel safe. You never asked me for jewelry to feel seen. You never once tried to use my money to build your face. You tried to use my money to build your work." I had to stop, just for a breath. My hands were steady, but my voice was not. I had read these words before, alone. I had never read them like this. I had never read them while standing in the same room as the people who had made them necessary. "I am giving you 2 burdens," I read at last. "The first is to grow the trust. The second is to watch. Watch how they act," the letter said. "Watch what they become. Watch what they say about you when they think you are small. Watch who offers you dignity when they believe you have nothing to give them back." Across the table, I saw my grandmother close her eyes. For the first time that morning, she did not look like the family figurehead. She looked like a widow listening to the echo of her husband through a doorway he no longer stood in. "If they begin to treat money like oxygen," I read, "if they begin to believe that access is birthright and not responsibility, you must remind them. Remind them even if they hate you for it." My voice had gone quiet. I did not try to correct it. Quiet felt honest. "Remind them," I read, "that wealth is not freedom from responsibility." I lifted my eyes. "It is responsibility." The words did not strike like an accusation. They landed like truth that had been waiting, patient and unblinking, for someone to stop pretending not to hear it. When I lowered the paper, no one spoke. Evan was the first to move. He leaned forward. His elbows rested on the table, his hands knit together, his head bowed. For years I had watched him perform himself. I had watched him fill silence with charm and fill insecurity with volume. I had watched him polish his own myth. This was the first time in a very long time that I had seen him without a layer. He did not look powerful. He looked exposed. My grandmother sat very still. Her expression had changed. The certainty was gone. The judgment was gone. In its place was something softer and far more painful. Regret. Her voice, when it finally came, was a whisper. "Walter," she breathed, though the man she loved was not in the room, and had not been for years. She lifted a trembling hand, pressed her fingers over her mouth, and closed her eyes. Vanessa's eyes were glossy. She shook her head once and whispered, "I did not know. I swear I did not know." I folded the letter. I smoothed it once with my palm. Then I looked at the people in front of me. Not as a trustee, not as an accused embarrassment, not as a spectacle, as family. "Here is how it works now," I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not speak like a judge delivering a sentence. I spoke like someone who had been up all night in a hospital hallway and was too tired to pretend kindness was the same thing as indulgence. If you want 6 figures, a quarter, I said, you are going to have to show that it is building something real, not just filling a closet, not just feeding a weekend fantasy, not just buying silence from whatever is hollow in you. No one interrupted me. If you want to flash the Morgan name, I said, you are going to have to show up for people who do not have one. You are going to mentor. You are going to sit in classrooms that do not have air conditioning and talk to teenagers who think college is impossible. You are going to fund something that will still be standing when you are not. I drew in a breath. I cannot keep signing off on purchases that mean nothing, I said. I cannot keep pretending that recreational emptiness is a legacy. I cannot keep watching you drown in things and call it happiness. I am not doing it anymore. My voice broke on the last word. That, more than any policy change, reached them. I saw it travel across the table like a wave. Evan lifted his head. His voice, when it came, was not grand. It was not smooth. It was not staged for applause. Rach, he said quietly, you could have shut me down years ago. I held his gaze. Yes. Why did you not? There was no good way to armor the answer. There was only the truth I had carried like an ache in the ribs. Because you are my brother, I said. I kept hoping you would stop before it killed you. Something in him cracked. It was not visible to everyone. It was visible to me. I watched the veneer fall away from his expression, and what remained, beneath the years of show and gloss, was a boy who had once held my hand when I was afraid of thunder. He nodded once. It was small. It mattered more than anything he had said in the last 12 hours. Around the table, anger had cooled into something else. Shame for some, relief for others, confusion, fatigue, a thin, unfamiliar shape that came close to humility. The meeting did not end with shouting. It ended in a hush. They did not look invincible anymore. They looked like people who had finally been forced to see the cost of what they had become. By late afternoon, the sky over Charleston had shifted from white to amber. The sun had dropped low enough that the club's manicured hedges cast long, deliberate shadows. I walked alone across the parking lot, past the row of imported cars with tinted windows and custom plates, until I reached my faded silver Camry. The paint was still scarred on the back bumper. The air conditioning still hesitated before it worked. The interior still smelled faintly of dry erase. Markers and old paper from my classroom. I sat in the driver's seat and let out a long breath I had been holding for 7 years. My phone buzzed. A message from Evan. Coffee? I will listen this time. Another message arrived seconds later. Vanessa, if I shut down the vanity brand and move that budget into your scholarship fund, does that count as building something real? A third message arrived. A number not saved in my phone. I opened it. Ms. Morgan, this is Caleb. Dad told me what you did. I have been wasting money like it grows on trees. I do not want to be that person. Can I help with the scholarship program? Caleb, 17. Evan's son. 3 generations in one afternoon. I felt something loosen in my chest. It did not feel like victory. It felt like air. The drive back to my apartment took 20 minutes. I rolled down the window at a stoplight and let in the smell of salt and heat. Charleston in late afternoon always feels like a memory trying to stay alive. The city holds history in the brick and the water line, and something about that has always made me feel steadier. My building was not new. The hallway light hummed when I unlocked my door. My living room was small, but it was mine. My books were stacked where I left them. My papers were still on the coffee table, half graded. On the counter sat a chipped mug and an unopened stack of essays on character analysis in American literature. I changed into a worn t-shirt and sat on the small balcony that overlooked the parking lot. The evening air had cooled. Somewhere below, someone was cooking with garlic. I wrapped my hands around a mug of coffee that was too strong and slightly bitter. The cup had a hairline crack along the handle. I watched the last of the sun go down behind the roofs across the street. They thought I was the problem because I live small, I said softly. The quiet answered me. But living small was not the problem, I said. Living empty was. I let the words sit in the air. They felt true. Money did not make them bad, I said. It let them hide from who they are. A car door closed somewhere below. A child laughed. A dog barked twice and then fell quiet. Tomorrow I go back to my classroom, I said. I will grade essays. I will break up an argument between two students who both need sleep more than detention. I will tell a girl in the back row that she is not stupid just because no one at home has time to help her with algebra. I will remind a boy who never talks that silence and invisibility are not the same thing. I took a sip of coffee. It had already begun to cool. That still feels like the real work, I said. The wind moved through the railing and touched my face. It felt like relief. It felt like permission. It felt like grief loosening, but not leaving. I looked down at my phone again. Evan's message waited. So did Caleb's. So did Vanessa's. If you had the power to approve or deny someone's lifestyle, I whispered into the fading light, would you protect them from themselves, or would you let them burn? I sat with that question. I am still not sure I got it right, I said. Tell me what you would do. Then I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the first quiet evening of my new life settle over me like a promise. There are moments in life when truth does not arrive like thunder, but like dawn quiet, patient, and impossible to stop once it begins to rise. For 7 years, Rachel let them believe she was small. She carried the weight of their laughter like a stone in her pocket, saying nothing, waiting for the right time to show that silence can also be power. And when that moment came, it was not vengeance that guided her hand. It was clarity. Her story is not really about wealth or legacy. It is about the invisible weight of expectation and the courage it takes to live by values that no one else seems to remember. Because sometimes, doing what is right will not make you applauded. It will make you misunderstood. Sometimes standing for meaning will cost you the comfort of belonging. But in the quiet after the storm, when everyone has said what they needed to say, the truth remains. Legacy is not about what we own, but what we build within ourselves and others. Rachel did not win by revealing her power. She won by staying true to it all along, when no one believed, when no one looked, when no one thanked her for it. She reminded them that dignity is not a brand, generosity is not weakness, and responsibility is not punishment. The wealth that survives time is the wealth that changes hearts. And maybe that is what we are all searching for. Something that lasts beyond applause, beyond inheritance, beyond the noise. Maybe we all carry a version of that letter inside us, waiting to be opened the day we finally choose meaning over comfort, truth over appearance, and love over pride. If this story found a place in your heart, take a moment to share what it taught you. What would you do if you were Rachel? If the power to change everything rested quietly in your hands? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this should keep being told, stories about quiet strength, about grace disguised as humility, stay with us. Subscribe, not for the drama, but for the reminder that even in a world obsessed with noise, silence, when it carries truth, can still move mountains.